Hey, I'm Laura, and today we're going to talk about money in relationships and why it creates so many conflicts, especially when one partner earns more than the other. Let me ask you something. Why is it that money, something so practical, so simple on the surface, can destroy even the strongest emotional connection? Why do couples who love each other start arguing, distancing, and sometimes even breaking apart over numbers? Because the truth is, money in relationships is never just about money. It's about power, it's about control, it's about identity, and most importantly, it's about how we see ourselves. Think about this. When two people come into a relationship, they don't just bring love, they bring beliefs. Beliefs about success, about security, about what it means to provide, and what it means to be enough. And many of these beliefs were formed long before the relationship even started. Now let's talk about one of the most common situations, when one partner earns significantly more than the other. On the surface, it might not seem like a problem. More money should mean less stress, right? But in reality, this is where some of the deepest emotional conflicts begin. Because for the person who earns less, it can trigger insecurity. Even if they don't say it out loud, they might feel, am I enough? Do I bring value to this relationship? Am I being judged? And slowly, comparison starts to grow, not always consciously, but emotionally. At the same time, the person who earns more might start feeling something else: pressure, responsibility, or even a sense of control. And this is where things get complicated, because when money enters the dynamic, the balance of power can shift. Even if no one talks about it, even if no one intends it, it's there. In small decisions, in subtle comments, in expectations. Maybe it shows up like this: I pay for most things, so I should have more say. Or, if I depend on them financially, I shouldn't argue too much. And just like that, the relationship is no longer just emotional. It becomes transactional. Now here's a question a lot of people don't ask. Why does money affect self-worth so deeply? Because in modern society, money is often tied to value. The more you earn, the more successful you're seen, the more powerful, the more important. So when there's a difference between partners, it's not just about income. It feels like a difference in worth, even if that's not true. Another important question is, why do couples argue so much about money? Research consistently shows that financial stress is one of the top causes of conflict in relationships. But again, it's not just about the money itself. It's about what money represents: security, freedom, control, fear. When people argue about spending, saving, or earning, they're often arguing about deeper fears. Fear of instability, fear of not being respected, fear of losing control. For example, one partner might want to save money constantly, not because they're controlling, but because they're afraid of losing security. Maybe they grew up in a household where money was unstable, where there was stress, fear, uncertainty. So now, saving feels like safety. The other partner might want to spend more freely, not because they're irresponsible, but because they associate money with freedom, with enjoyment, with living life fully. And when these two perspectives meet, conflict is almost inevitable. Not because they don't love each other, but because they see the world differently. Now let's talk about another sensitive topic. Does earning more give you more power in a relationship? Some people will say yes, others will say no. But psychologically, it often does, even if it's subtle. Because the person who contributes more financially may feel more entitled to make decisions, and the other person may feel less confident expressing disagreement. And over time, this imbalance can create resentment on both sides. The one who earns more might feel, I'm carrying everything, while the one who earns less might feel, I'm not valued. And both end up feeling misunderstood. So how do you fix this? How do you prevent money from becoming a source of conflict? First, you separate money from worth. Earning more does not mean being more valuable. A relationship is not a business. It's not about who contributes more financially. It's about how both people contribute emotionally, mentally, and in everyday life. Second, you talk about money openly, without judgment, without shame. Because silence creates assumptions, and assumptions create conflict. Third, you understand each other's story. Why does your partner see money the way they do? What experiences shape that belief? When you understand that, conflict becomes easier to manage. Fourth, you create shared rules. Not based on control, but based on agreement. How do we spend? How do we save? What matters to us as a couple? Because without shared values, money will always divide you. And finally, you remind yourself of something very important. Money can support a relationship, but it cannot replace connection. You can have financial stability and still feel emotionally disconnected. You can have less money and still feel deeply fulfilled. So the real question is not who earns more, but how do we relate to each other despite that difference? Because at the end of the day, a relationship is not measured in income. It's measured in respect, in understanding, in emotional safety. If you want to understand more about relationships, human behavior, and the psychology behind everyday conflicts, make sure to follow the channel. Until next time, don't forget to subscribe.